It began on a night thick with candlelight and hushed voices inside the Marlowe, one of New York City's most exclusive dining rooms. Waiters in crisp black vests moved like shadows, carrying silver trays that gleamed under chandeliers the size of wagon wheels. The scent of truffle butter-aged wine and seared ribeye floated through the air like an invisible promise of luxury. And yet, every whisper, every darting glance circled back to one man, Dominic Caruso, a titan of the digital age. A billionaire whose fortune rose higher than the mirrored towers that bore his name downtown. He strode into the restaurant with the swagger of a man who had never heard the word no. Sharp suit, polished shoes, the kind of confidence that could silence a room without trying. He was brash striking and convinced the world bent toward the gravity of his voice. But that evening, across the polished mahogany floors, a woman no one noticed was about to turn his world upside down. Clara Romano. She was a waitress blending into the tapestry of service like one more piece of fine china. Steady hands, quiet eyes. Her tray balanced not only crystal glasses, but the weight of her own survival. Clara had been working double shifts for 2 years, each tip folded carefully into envelopes marked for rent, for groceries, for her mother's prescription bottles that grew heavier by the month. To the glittering patrons of the Marlowe, she was invisible, just another servant in black shoes and a starched apron. But Clara carried something no one in that room could see, a mind trained to hear the world in many voices. A gift with languages that once had Yale professors calling her a prodigy. Latin, French, Italian, she didn't just study them, she lived them. She could trace their root sense, their rhythm, hear their histories beating beneath each syllable, and yet hardship had forced her away from all that. Tuition bills gave way to hospital bills. Dreams gave way to duty. Yale became a memory. Her battlefield now was a crowded dining room where the rich devoured meals worth more than she earned in a week. That night, Dominic raised a glass of red wine, its color deep as garnet, and leaned back in his chair with a smile that belonged on a billboard. He prepared to show off, to remind his table of investors and admirers that he was not just powerful, but cultured. His voice rolled out loud enough to draw attention. He spoke what he claimed was his native Italian. But the words stumbled from his tongue like broken glass, a butchered proverb twisted into nonsense. His companions laughed anyway, their admiration polite, their smiles forced. For them, his wealth polished every flaw. Clara froze mid-step, her tray hovering in the air. The words scraped against her ears like nails on glass. Her pulse kicked hard against her ribs. She knew Italian the way some people know hymns sewn into her from childhood lullabies. What she had just heard wasn't poetry. It was an insult, clumsy syllables paraded as culture. Something inside her shifted. A flicker sharp and undeniable. Because in that moment, Clara Romano wasn't just a waitress. She was the keeper of a truth no billionaire could buy. What happened next would not only humble Dominic Caruso in front of his empire of admirers, it would drag Clara into a dangerous game of pride, power, and survival. A game where words could wound deeper than knives, and where one woman's courage to speak could tip the balance of an empire. Dominic Caruso leaned back in his leather chair glass of Barolo, tilted toward the chandelier glow, his voice booming across the hushed restaurant. He spoke with flourish, as though unveiling wisdom carried through generations. The wolf may lose its fur, but not its vice, he began. A proverb clumsy but intact. His companions nodded, raising their glasses. Then he added with the kind of confidence that comes from unchecked power, because his soul is a mirror for the sky, a nonsensical patchwork of words. Empty. Hollow. The men at his table chuckled and clapped Robert, even scribbling it down on a napkin as though it were scripture. To them, if Dominic spoke, it must have been profound. Money had a way of turning gibberish into gospel. But just beyond the circle of light, carrying a tray heavy with porcelain plates, Clara Romano froze. The words stabbed at her ears. Italian was not just her mother's lullabies, not just Yale lectures, it was heritage history truth. What Dominic had spoken was an insult dressed in silk. Her chest tightened. She should have swallowed the irritation, as she always did. Keep her head down, collect her tips, pay the pharmacy bill. That was survival, but something in her refused. Clara placed her tray quietly on a side table. Her palms tingled. Her heart drummed like a war beat. Then she stepped forward into the light of Dominic Caruso's table. "Forgive me, sir," she said, her voice steady, low, but carrying. She spoke not in English, not in Dominic's fractured phrases, but in the fluid, lyrical cadence of true Italian. The accent of her grandmother's northern village, unpolished yet elegant, cut the air like clean steel. The proverb ends with the wolf, nothing more. What followed means nothing. The sound seemed to ripple through the dining room. Forks halted midair. The clink of glassware stilled. Conversations at surrounding tables softened, then died. A silence spread outward, heavy and complete. Dominic's grin wavered. His eyes, sharp and dark, snapped toward her. In that instant, the unspoken order of things had shifted. He, the billionaire accustomed to being the cleverest in the room, had been corrected by a waitress. In his supposed mother tongue, Clara's throat tightened. She had done it now. Her job, her income, her mother's fragile lifeline, they could vanish with a single command from this man. A bead of sweat traced down her spine, and then unexpectedly, another voice joined. "Miss Romano is correct. It was Lorenzo Vitale, a guest seated across from Dominic." An older gentleman with silver hair brushed neatly back his suit, tailored but understated. Unlike the others, he did not laugh too loudly, did not hang on Dominic's every word. He had observed in silence until now. He leaned slightly forward, his Italian accent rich but measured. "Her command of the language is impeccable. Your addition was poetic, perhaps, but not authentic." His tone was gentle, almost fatherly, yet his words carried the weight of authority. A man who had lived culture did not need to parade it. Dominic's jaw tightened. His face flushed not with wine, but with humiliation. A ripple of murmurs moved across the dining hall. Patrons' eyes shifted between the billionaire and the waitress who had dared to defy him. Clara lowered her gaze. She did not gloat, did not smile. Her body screamed to retreat, but her dignity held her in place for a beat longer. Lorenzo Vitale lifted his glass toward her. "Brava," he said softly, then took a slow sip as if sealing the moment. Clara stepped back, reclaiming her tray with trembling fingers. Her heart pounded in her ears. She had spoken the truth, but in doing so she had shattered her invisibility. That night within the golden walls of the Marlowe, Clara Romano became both legend and target. Dominic Caruso, the man who could buy and sell skyscrapers with a signature, had been humbled. And humiliation for men like him was never forgiven. The Marlowe had seen its share of powerful men, but none returned as often or as quietly as Dominic Caruso that week. He did not come for the foie gras or the Bordeaux. He came to watch. From the corner of the bar, his presence was like a storm cloud, still, but heavy, impossible to ignore. He nursed a single whiskey for hours, dark eyes locked on Clara Romano as she moved between tables. She didn't notice him at first, too consumed by the rhythm of her work menus tucked under her arm, silverware aligned with precision, a soft smile for the guests who barely looked up from their phones. But Dominic noticed everything. He saw the way she switched effortlessly into French when a pair of Canadian tourists struggled with the menu. He watched her slow her English for an elderly couple from Tokyo, gestures, kind voice patient. He caught the brief moment she hummed under her breath in Italian, as she cleared plates, the language spilling out as naturally as breath itself. And with every small observation, his curiosity grew sharper. By midnight, the billionaire's curiosity had transformed into action. From his penthouse office overlooking the Hudson, he made a call. Then another. And another. Dominic Caruso did not tolerate mysteries, not in business, not in life. Within 48 hours, a dossier landed on his desk. Clara Romano, age 26, born Hartford, Connecticut, daughter of Anthony Romano, late history professor, sole caregiver for her mother, Angela Romano, battling a rare neurological disease. Then the pages that mattered most, Yale University. Romance linguistics, a perfect 4.0 GPA. Published research in the Yale Review of Linguistics. A prodigy professors had written. A talent to be remembered. And yet, withdrawn. Vanished. Replaced by late-night shifts and coffee-stained aprons. Dominic read the file twice then, a third time, as though testing its reality. The waitress who had humiliated him was not a fluke. She was brilliance wrapped in obscurity. A mind that should have been lecturing halls reduced to serving tables for the cost of survival. That discovery did not cool his anger. It stoked it. Anger was easier to carry when mixed with fascination. On a rainy Thursday night, Clara left through the back alley of the Marlowe. She walked with shoulders hunched against the wind, her tote bag slung over one arm and the city's glow reflecting off slick pavement. Halfway down the block, she heard the low purr of an engine. A black sedan pulled alongside, silent as a predator. The tinted window rolled down. Dominic Caruso's face appeared half in shadow, half in the sodium glow of the streetlight. "Get in, Miss Romano," he said. His voice was calm, almost casual, but beneath it lay steel. "We need to talk." Clara's breath caught in her chest. Every instinct screamed to keep walking, to run even. But the car glided forward with her smooth and deliberate. Behind the tinted glass, his gaze never wavered. Finally, with a heart pounding like a war drum, she pulled the door handle and slid inside. The door shut with a heavy thud, sealing her into leather-lined silence. The air smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. A pane of privacy glass separated them from the driver. It felt less like a conversation and more like a cage. Dominic didn't waste time. He tapped the tablet in his lap, the screen glowing with lines of text. Clara recognized instantly her own history. "Clara Romano," he said softly. "Yale prodigy, a fellowship winner, a paper on the Venetian dialects, and then gone." Her stomach turned cold. He knew everything. He leaned closer, voice low, but steady. "You gave up brilliance for sacrifice. For your mother." His eyes, sharp and unreadable, locked onto hers. "I respect that. But talent like yours doesn't belong carrying plates. It belongs reshaping the future." Then, like a blade sliding from its sheath, he offered the words that would alter the course of her life. "I have a deal for you." The hum of the car engine was the only sound between them. Outside New York's streets glistened with rain neon lights, smearing across the windows like paint on glass. Clara sat rigid, her tote bag clutched in her lap, every nerve inside her on edge. Dominic Caruso studied her as though she were a riddle only he could solve. Finally he spoke. "My world runs on competition," he said, his tone flat, almost clinical. "And right now, I'm at war." He swiped across the tablet, bringing up a dossier with photographs and headlines. A familiar name appeared again and again, Gideon Blackwell. "Old money?" Dominic explained, his lip curling slightly. "Blackwell was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He thinks tradition makes him untouchable. But he forgets tradition doesn't innovate. I do." He tapped the screen again. pulling up a new set of documents, contracts, government seals, and figures with more zeros than Clara had ever imagined. "The prize is this," he said, voice tightening. "A government contract worth billions. Whoever wins it will shape the next 2 decades of infrastructure security, everything." Clara tried to steady her breathing. None of this had anything to do with her, or so she thought. Dominic leaned in closer, his eyes hard as flint. The deciding factor, a family of investors from Switzerland. The Crowers, old-world bankers as conservative as they come. But they hold the balance of power. And here's the catch, they insist on conducting their negotiations in Romansh. Clara blinked. Romansh. A thin smile tugged at his lips. An obscure Alpine language. Spoken by maybe 30,000 people tucked into valleys most Americans couldn't find on a map. Blackwell thinks he's clever. He's already hired translators from Zurich. But here's the truth. Dominic's voice dropped lower, heavy with intent. The Crowers don't want translators. They want respect. They want to know the person across the table understands them, their idioms, their culture, the pulse of their land. Translators can't give them that. You can. Clara's stomach tightened. She understood now. He wasn't just fascinated by her. He had found a weapon. "I need someone who can read the currents beneath the words," Dominic continued. "Not just translate sentences, but the silences between them, the gestures, the choice of a proverb at the right moment. I need you." Her pulse hammered. "And if I refuse?" For the first time, Dominic's gaze softened, not with kindness, but with calculation. "Then your mother remains on the waiting list. And we both know the waiting list is a death sentence." Clara's throat constricted. He had struck the nerve she had fought to protect. Angela Romano, fading day by day, her laughter, a memory her future shrinking to the 4 walls of a sick room. Dominic went on, his voice smoother now, persuasive. "There's an experimental therapy. BN301. Gene therapy. It's already shown remarkable results. Blackwell has ties to the company running the trials. I can secure a place for your mother. No waiting list, no bills. Full access." Clara turned her face away, eyes stinging. It was leverage. It was ruthless. But it was also hope, the first real hope in 2 years. When she spoke again, her voice was steady cold. "If I do this, there are conditions." Dominic arched a brow. "Name them." "Want everything in writing. A contract signed by both parties detailing exactly what you'll provide for my mother's care." He gave a slow nod. "Done. 2, I am not your employee. I am your consultant, independent, equal." Another nod. "Agreed. And 3. Clara's eyes locked onto his. "You will never again use my family as a weapon. Not my mother. Not her illness. Never. This is professional. Nothing more." For a long moment, Dominic said nothing. Then, to her surprise, he leaned back and gave a small, almost respectful smile. "You have a spine," he said softly. "Good. I like that." The car slowed to a stop in front of her apartment. Dominic set the tablet aside and looked at her one last time. "You'll have the files on the Crowers by morning. Welcome to the game, Miss Romano." Clara stepped out into the rain-soaked night, her heart pounding. She had made a bargain with a man she despised. A devil's pact sealed not with ink, but with desperation. And for the first time in years, she felt both terror and the faintest flicker of hope. The jet cut across the Atlantic like a silver arrow. Its leather cabin hushed its windows, framing a sky painted in pale blues and streaks of gold. Clara Romano sat at the polished table, stacks of folders spread before her. Pages filled with notes on the Crower family lineages, customs, favored proverbs fluttered with every vibration of the engines. For the first time since she had walked away from Yale, Clara felt alive in the way she once had in classrooms and libraries. The familiar rhythm of study, the thrill of unraveling old idioms, of mapping culture onto language, it returned to her like a tide she had thought long receded. Dominic Caruso sat across from her laptop, open phone, silent. He was no longer the swaggering figure from the Marlowe, but a man consumed by purpose. Even so, his intensity unnerved her. At odd moments, his eyes lifted from the screen, watching her as though memorizing every detail. When the jet descended over the Italian Alps, Clara pressed her face to the window. Below lay Lake Como, dark and still, the moon casting a silver path across its surface. Perched along its shores, nestled between hillsides, glowed villas like lanterns in the night. Dominic's villa was among them, stone and glass, woven together, a marriage of centuries-old arches with the stark lines of modern design. To Clara, it looked less like a home and more like a fortress, built to command the water and the mountains alike. Inside, marble floors cooled her feet as she stepped across wide halls lit by sconces, but it was not luxury that consumed her attention in the days that followed. It was work. They studied in a library lined with books so old their bindings seemed to whisper. Dominic brought the business strategies and the figures, the stakes. Clara brought the language, the nuance, the unseen undercurrents. Hours stretched into nights, nights blurred into mornings. Dominic stumbled through Romance phrases, his tongue tripping over vowels foreign to him. Clara corrected him with a sharp patience she hadn't known she possessed. At first, he resisted, bristling when she cut him off. But slowly she saw it. He listened. He adjusted. He repeated until the sound landed right. On one night, as dawn cracked over the lake, Dominic leaned back exhausted, his voice hoarse from practice. Clara watched him for a long moment, puzzled at the sight of the untouchable billionaire struggling like a schoolboy over syllables. "You could have hired someone else," she said quietly. He smirked, though his eyes were tired. "I did. You." Later that evening, as they shared a rare pause, the conversation shifted. They sat near the villa's terrace, the lake glimmering beneath them. The air smelled faintly of pine and stone, warmed by the day. Dominic spoke first. "My father worked steel in Pittsburgh, 40 years in the mills. Came home every night with his hands cut and blackened. He sent me to school. Every penny he earned poured into my future. When he got sick, I tried to pay for his care. He refused. Said he hadn't broken his body just to lean on his son. Pride. It can be as heavy as iron." The words hung between them, vulnerable and raw. Clara said nothing at first. She saw him not as the ruthless billionaire, but as the son of an immigrant laborer shaped by calloused hands and a stubborn refusal of charity. For a flicker of a moment, the armor slipped. She glimpsed the man behind it, still ambitious, still relentless, but human. The moment passed quickly. Dominic cleared his throat, turned back to the documents, his mask sliding into place. But Clara carried it with her. For the first time, she wondered if Dominic Caruso's empire had been built not only on hunger for power, but also on a desperate need to prove himself worthy of his father's sacrifice. The Clara estate rose from the cliffs of Lake Como like a medieval fortress reborn in marble and glass. Its towers overlooked the water, its high gates guarded by stone lions that had weathered centuries. Inside, the scent of cedar smoke mingled with polished leather and the faint musk of history. Dominic Caruso strode into the great library, as though he belonged there. But beneath the polished calm of his steps, Clara Romano could feel the tension. She matched his pace files tucked beneath her arm, her tailored suit far plainer than the silks and jewels around her. Yet her presence carried weight. She was the invisible piece no one had accounted for. The library stretched 2 stories high, lined with shelves dark as molasses, books bound in cracked leather, whispering of forgotten ages. Long windows overlooked the lake, and at the center of the room, an oak table the size of a small boat waited. Around it sat Friedrich Krauer, patriarch of the banking dynasty, flanked by his two sons, Stefan and Klaus. Their faces were carved in the same mold, pale eyes, sharp noses, expressions unreadable. On the opposite side sat Gideon Blackwell. His silver hair gleamed under the chandeliers, his bespoke suit a declaration of old wealth. At his elbow waited a stiff translator from Zurich, already flipping open a notebook ready to mediate. Blackwell wore a smirk, as though the outcome had been decided before a word was spoken. Friedrich Krauer rose first. His voice, gravelly with age yet steady, filled the library. He spoke in Romansch, the dialect of his youth, its syllables crisp, precise, proud. The Zurich translator leaned forward, but Clara was faster. She replied in the same tongue, her words flowing like water over stone, her accent tuned to the subtle cadence of the Sir Sylvan Valley. "You honor us with your welcome," she said, bowing her head slightly. "The view over your lake is as magnificent as the legacy of your family." The elder banker blinked surprise, flickering into delight. A smile tugged faintly at his lips. His sons exchanged a look. Across the table, Blackwell's smirk faltered. His translator hesitated, caught flat-footed. From that moment, the current shifted. Clara guided Dominic's words with precision, translating not just the language, but the meaning. When Dominic spoke of market innovation, she reshaped it as a river-changing course without losing its strength. When he described efficiency, she used an idiom about a farmer who harvests with both hands. Every phrase landed with resonance. The Krauers leaned in, intrigued. Dominic followed her rhythm, his sharp edges softened by her cultural bridge. It was not just a business pitch, it was respect in action. But Gideon Blackwell was not a man to sit quietly while ground slipped from beneath him. He waited, then cut in his voice, slick with mockery. "A remarkable performance, Dominic," he said in English, his words dripping across the polished table. His eyes shifted toward Clara. "Though one wonders, what does a waitress know of the old ways?" The insult cracked through the air like a whip. The library stiffened. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to pause. Clara felt her pulse hammer. For an instant, she wanted to shrink back, to become invisible again. But something steadied her. She drew a breath, lifted her chin, and spoke. First, she dismantled Blackwell's numbers. With calm authority, she pointed out a glaring weakness in his projections, translating it into Romansch, so Friedrich heard it in the language of his father. The old banker's brows furrowed. Then she exposed the hidden risks buried in Blackwell's proposal regulations, ignored compliance issues glossed over. Her voice sharpened, steady as a scalpel. Finally, she delivered the strike. Turning slightly, she addressed one of Blackwell's quiet associates, a man whose accent she had noticed earlier. Switching to a remote Piedmontese dialect, she asked a cutting question, naming a village infamous for its swindlers. The man's face went pale. Clara turned back to Friedrich and spoke a proverb older than the books around them. "Never trust a man who tries to sell you the winter sun." The words landed like a thunderclap. They carried the weight of truth, of cultural memory no outsider could fake. Blackwell froze, his smirk shattered. His translator fumbled, unable to spin what had just happened. His associate shrank in his seat, eyes downcast. For a long, breathless moment, silence reigned. Then Friedrich Krauer rose slowly, his chair creaking against the stone floor. He fixed his pale gaze on Dominic Caruso. "Mr. Caruso," he said in deliberate English so all could understand, "you surround yourself with people of substance. The contract is yours." The verdict was final. Blackwell's face blanched with fury, but he said nothing. The sons nodded their agreement, already moving to finalize terms. Dominic inclined his head in gratitude, but everyone in that library knew the truth The real victory had come from the young woman who spoke with the weight of history in her voice. Clara Romano had not just translated words. She had shifted the balance of power. Dominic had won. But the fingerprints of triumph belonged to her. 2 weeks later, the sterile light of a hospital room felt softer than usual. Clara Romano stood by her mother's bedside, watching as a team of doctors prepared the first dose of the experimental therapy. For years, despair had been the only visitor in this room, lingering in the sound of labored breathing, in the silent tick of machines, in the helplessness of dwindling options. But now, hope entered, quiet but undeniable, carried in a small vial of medicine. Her mother, Angela, squeezed Clara's hand weakly. For the first time in months, her eyes carried a glimmer, not dulled by pain. Clara bent close, whispering, "We've made it, Mama. Just hold on." Tears welled, but Clara didn't let them fall. She had learned to be steel for her mother. Yet now, in this moment of fragile possibility, the steel melted into something gentler relief. Later that evening, the door opened quietly. Clara turned startled and found Dominic Caruso standing there. No entourage, no designer suit. Just a simple gray sweater and dark trousers, his presence subdued, almost uncertain. He looked less like the billionaire who had commanded boardrooms and more like a man carrying his own ghosts. He lingered at the threshold for a moment before stepping in. His voice was lower, stripped of its usual bravado. "I wanted to see how she was doing." Clara studied him, wary but tired. "She's resting. The doctors are hopeful." Dominic nodded, his gaze dropping briefly to the floor before meeting hers again. "You should know. You didn't just help me win a contract." His words carried weight, deliberate and unpolished. "You reminded me what strength really looks like." For a moment, Clara didn't know what to say. Exhaustion pulled at her bones, but beneath it there was something else. A strange peace she hadn't felt in years. She managed a faint smile. "Strength isn't always loud, Dominic. Sometimes it's just refusing to be silent." He looked at her as if committing the words to memory. In that sterile room, surrounded by humming machines and the faint scent of antiseptic, Clara felt something shift. She was no longer only a caretaker, drowning under bills, no longer just a waitress blending into the background of luxury she could never afford. She was a woman who had stood up, spoken out, and altered the course of giants. For the first time in years, her future was not chained to survival. She had reclaimed it with the one gift no one could strip away: her voice. When Dominic extended his offer, "There's a place for you in my world, Clara." At my side, shaping what comes next, she felt the weight of it. Once the promise of wealth and power might have seemed irresistible. Now she understood. His world was his, but her choices would be her own. "I'll think about it," she said softly, and for the first time, those words weren't an excuse, they were a declaration of freedom. Dominic nodded. He didn't push. He turned toward the door, then paused, glancing back. In flawless, understated Italian, "No theatrics, no mistakes," he said, "Stai bene." "Be well." Clara's lips curved into a quiet smile. "You too, Dominic." The door closed behind him, leaving only the hum of the machines and the steady rhythm of her mother's breathing. Clara sat once more by the bedside, the glow of hope warming the sterile room. Outside the hospital window, the city lights shimmered like constellations. For the first time, Clara saw them not as distant stars, but as open roads. Roads she could choose for herself. Sometimes, the smallest act of courage, speaking the truth when silence would be safer, can alter the balance of power. Clara Romano proved that wisdom, dignity, and integrity carry a worth far beyond money. Her story is a reminder, even in a world ruled by wealth and pride, the human spirit can rise unbought and unbroken. And as the screen begins to fade, if this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what courage means to you, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and hope. Because sometimes, your words may be the spark that inspires someone else's fight.